Well, hello and welcome to the World Copper Podcast. I'm here this evening, Australia time, joined by Juan Carlos Guajardo, all the way in his early morning in Santiago, and Simon Hunt in Dubai. I think it's late afternoon there, so a very civilized time. It's pretty
Tea
late in
time.
the evening for me. But we are the Three Musketeers, so the Three Copper Musketeers, and this, I believe, is episode 11 of the World Copper Podcast. Well, it's pretty much a month ago, gentlemen, since we convened, and the witch's brew of the conflict in the Gulf has, I think, left us with a little bit more clarity, at least superficially, on where we're heading. And Simon is laughing very much at that because I know your opinions. But we do have what appears to be called a truce. There's a document that has been signed, apparently. And I'm not sure whether it's been signed in person or at distance. It does look like a fragile sort of peace. And we do hope it lasts as much as anything from the human point of view. There's people who've suffered over these last 2 months or so as a consequence of the conflict. We will talk a little bit more about the impact of that on the copper market. But maybe Simon, you kick off and give us your humble opinions as to are we now in a new era, at least for the next few months? I know you've talked about the conflict on a broader canvas and a schism, I suppose, between the old US hegemony, as you describe it, and the New World Order, the bipolar world, or is it a tripolar world? Do you see that we're in a period of relative stability? Should we lie more peacefully in our sleep at night at the moment?
Well, if you'd asked me that question a couple of days ago, I would have answered by saying that there was a prospect of greater stability entering the world and less one of confrontation in the Middle East. But events in the last 12 hours or so has really pushed us back towards thinking more in terms of another escalation and a breakdown in the MOU. And this arises from the fact that Israel has escalated its attacks in Lebanon, and that the meeting that was supposed to have taken place today in Switzerland, by the way, in a very secure place, which is owned by the Qatari royal family, that has now been postponed, or has it been cancelled? Iran has responded very clearly and bluntly by saying, unless Israel steps out of Lebanon immediately and immediately stops bombing Lebanon, otherwise we will consider not finally signing the MOU. Out of this stems an internal problem in Tehran. And I will read out a short paragraph that comes from the Supreme Leader's official statement, because this shows you the dissent within Iran's leadership.
Yes.
So I quote, it's very short, but it's very essential. This is what the Supreme Leader said. I, in principle, had a different opinion. but due to the commitment that the Honorable President, as the head of the Supreme National Security Council, gave on behalf of himself and other members to uphold the rights of the Iranian nation and the resistance front, and because he explicitly accepted responsibility for it, I issued permission for it.
Mm.
What it's showing us is the separate views between the president's crowd
Internally.
and the IRGC. And from that, one can probably guess that America has been negotiating with the president's crowd and not with the IRGC.
Mm.
Another element that we need to introduce, and that is, what is the position of Iran's foreign minister? Because he has been a lead person in the negotiations.
Yes.
Our own interpretation is that he has a foot in both camps. But we come back to the big question: who is actually calling the big shots?
Mm. Mm.
If it is the IRGC, then that is another block on the MOU being put into place. So at the moment, all one can say is everything is up in the air. And
Well,
on that hinges the flow of vessels out
yes.
of the straits, and therefore the impact on things that the copper industry needs to know, which is, of course, sulfuric acid.
Yes. Well, so there's no. I mean, in many ways, there's many changes and no changes. We still live in this world of great unpredictability. The copper price, last time I looked at it, it's not really budged very much. I think since even the last time we spoke. And this is a bit of a dilemma. We'll come back to that one about the difference between what we're perceiving in the physical market and the financial world. But coming back to obviously oil and related energy costs are one thing, but the byproducts, as you said, the sulfuric acid shortage, which has been exacerbated by China holding back on or preventing shipments of sulfuric acid. This is a product that used to be pretty much free in certain geographies. It was a nuisance product, and now it's become very valuable. And Juan Carlos, uh, you mentioned this on our previous call. The impact on of shortages in acid on leaching processes. These are the leaching of copper oxide ores to recover cathode from those operations, which I think you said was about 20 or 21% of global copper supply that depended on that acid to drive these processes. Now, we're not going to lose surely 20 or 21% of supply overnight, but there's very much a cost imposition on producers who rely on sulfuric acid as a premium input. And Chile is right up there as one of the dominant forces in this particular part of the copper world. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. The Chile developed a strong SXEW production in the early 90s. Although the oxide resources has been repleting over the last
Mm,
years, the remaining resources are much more sulfuric acid intensive.
yes.
So at the end of the day, the need of sulfuric acid remains very, very critical for around 1 million tons of copper in Chile, around 20% of the total production. So it is very, very important. What we have found here is, of course, you have different levels of requirements depending on the geological characteristic of deposits. But at the end of the day, the, the, the level of impact is related to the commercial policies that mining companies applied last year. It's important to say that the many mining companies secure sulfuric acid in long-term contracts.
Yes.
But some other companies prefer to be exposed to the spot market.
The spot market.
And those companies are suffering the impact. So
is that a big proportion of the overall production system? Or?
No, I think most of the companies prefer to secure an important percentage of their sulfuric acid needs through long-term contracts.
Yes.
And the evidence here is that there is no shortage of sulfuric acid. However, the price has tripled, at least tripled in the last month. Usually, you could get sulfuric acid at $150 per ton. Right now, the price is above $500 dollars per pound.
Well, just to butt in, the current price in the DRC, if you can get sulfuric acid, is $1,200, and you can't get if you wanted 100 tons or more, you can't get it.
So how's that, Simon? How has that impacted? I mean, DRC accounts for what? It's less than 1 million tons of overall copper production, and
of which about 80% is SXEW.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I've got a friend in the DRC who's been there for 6 months. There's a big mining symposium going on at the moment. Nobody, and he's spoken to with the big companies, the small companies, nobody is prepared to offer any suggestion as to what copper production will be this year, let alone next year. It's too uncertain. And if sulfuric acid is not going to be coming out of the straits or sulfur, then you're going to see a lot of the smaller mines just simply closing down.
You've mentioned this before about the DRC is in this caught between a rock and a hard place of having traditionally a lot of support from China and increasingly interest from American sponsorship, let's call it. But those sort of switches take time, and in the world of mining, 3 or 4 months is surely too little to really change the dynamics of the short-term pressures in the marketplace.
Yeah, quite right. I mean,
but this time,
the general theme that my friend gives me is there are a lot of nervous people in the mining sector in the DRC. They simply cannot plan.
Yeah.
But
Juan Carlos,
yeah.
I have a question to you. Long-term sulfuric acid contracts, where do they come from?
Basically from Asia, some from Europe and Peru. These are the 3 main places where Chilean miners get their assets. So Japan is very important, Peru is very important, and China also important. Some from Germany and Spain.
China's cancelled all export contracts.
Yes, but at the same time, the Chilean miners are exploring new sources. India is one of the markets that has been, is a new source of sulfuric acid.
Yeah.
India is restarting the construction of smelters. So that's a way the miners are dealing with this emergency. What is interesting is the long-term consequences, because this is a new alert that supply chains are are much more dangerous than before. Not only for sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is a new alert, but we have seen
Everything.
this before. For example, one consequence is the discussion of whether Chile or Latin American countries should have more copper smelters in order to prevent the potential shortage of sulfuric acid. But at the same time, we have too many smelters around the world. Therefore, the economics are not so strong. And on top of that, we have the geopolitical factor. The United States pushing for the disconnection with China, and therefore pushing for more smelters in America. So these are very interesting times, and I think the long-term consequences is also something that we should take a look into.
All those things are strategic rather than very short-term market-driven. I mean, we've just had the G7 meeting. Whoever belongs in the G7 these days, and its supplementary partners, of which Australia is one. And I think one of the closing statements there was about a commitment to supporting sources of critical minerals, which pretty much, as we said before, includes everything, really. All minerals are critical, otherwise we wouldn't bother digging them out of the ground. Copper is one of the more critical minerals, I would say, and rightly so. But those points that are made at these meetings are all well and good, and everyone wants to sort of move towards improved security of supply. But how much of that has actually really come about on the ground? And Juan Carlos, I know you're in the heart of the copper producing world with one of the largest copper producing companies in the world, a state-owned producer, Codelco, and appreciate that what you can and can't say about Codelco, which seems to have been through a crisis, but they have had lots of changes of leadership, let's say. Should we read a lot into that, and in particular into the way that the world has changed and companies are having to redesign themselves, whether they're owned by the state or by investors?
Well, the first thing to say is that paradoxically, we are in times of actually lower production, but high prices. So
yes.
You should expect higher production as the prices are very high. But it's happening the opposite, and that's a very interesting point to analyze.
Yes.
For example, before going into Codelco, the Chilean copper mine production will decrease this year. I'm not sure if the market is aware of this, but the copper production will decrease this year.
Yes.
And
what do we? I mean, in overall terms, we're talking about what a bit over 5 million tons a year of
Chile
Chile
has been stagnated around 5.5 million tons over the last 10, 12 years. And this year will go below this mark.
Or below 5.5 million, or below 5?
Yeah, no, below 5.5.
Yes. But the point is that even with demand sluggish, it's still growing, or at least over more than 1 or 2 years, it's growing, and and yet you're saying Chilean mine supply has basically stood still for a number of years now, despite
That's right.
some efforts to increase production at largely as existing operations. Yes.
That's right. 15 years ago, Chile explained 35% of the global production. Right now, is below 25%. So
Yes.
the market share, let's say, has been declining.
Mm.
So there are many reasons, and certainly we can go deeper on that. But let me talk about Codelco because
Yes.
Codelco is facing, as you said, an important crisis, a long anticipated crisis, but it was impossible to stop. And at this time, we have a very important situation. The a new government came in
Yes.
a couple of months ago, and a new chairman and a couple of new members of the board took office. And I think these new people has a completely different approach to the crisis in Codelco.
Mm-hmm.
The previous administrations were reluctant to, let's say, face this crisis, and these people understand that there is no more time to waste,
Yes.
and therefore very hard decisions are expected ahead. I'm talking about acknowledging that Codelco is not longer the world's largest copper company.
Yes.
Codelco has been fighting to preserve that position, and in my opinion, that was a wrong policy because it forced the company to the limit. But now, and this is another big sentence I want to share with our listeners. The new normal is a company that will produce below 1.3 million tons and not 1.5, 1.7 as it was for a long time. And this is going to last for at least a decade.
Yes.
So that's a very important change. The good news is that the new CEO of the company, Mr. Jorge Gomez, is probably the best we can get right now for Codelco. And therefore, we have hope that he could start a transition solution to the company. But it will take many years to have a new, let's say, a new solid and healthy company.
Yes. And private investment, well, we sound a bit like a stuck record on this. Everyone loves copper. It's the favorite son, I suppose, of the metals world. And we see that in the prices, obviously, but that clearly hasn't translated into a lot of meaningful progress on the ground. Here in Australia, I think there has been a tick up in exploration activity or support for exploration activity. But when you actually come to look at the minutiae in company reports and progress around drilling holes and all the boring stuff that goes with trying to develop a new copper mining center, that doesn't feel like, to me, it's changed very much. I think there still seems to be an impatience with time, let's say, which is what mining doesn't have. And when it comes to the United States, so perhaps move along here to the ever-present threat of tariffs. I think we're coming up to an important date soon, or a decision-making point around whether the US should impose a tariff on the imports of cathode. And I'm a bit confused as to what our stance is on that, because it seems to change every month, every time we speak. But it is there in the pricing mechanisms, is it?
Well, my take after chatting with somebody who's pretty close to the game in America is that the government is going to keep one guessing, not just for this year, but for some time, and will do that by promising to introduce a tariff and then not producing a tariff until they have got their act together, and then will introduce it, maybe in 1 or 2 years. But the sense that I get is probably not the end of June or whenever it is this year.
So there's a very big stick and a
there's
very small carrot, so to speak, metaphorically. I mean, well, as we've seen with the crisis in Iran, the difference between what actually happens and the bluster is a two separate things. So is this the same thing?
more or
It doesn't
less.
make sense. We've said it before. It doesn't really make sense to American industry to
No,
impose
it doesn't.
those tariffs.
They want to build to go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, to rebuild a strategic stockpile. But my sense is that they've got greater priorities on other critical minerals before addressing the question for copper.
Yes. Well, copper, in that sense, copper's a little bit more old-fashioned than neodymium, and materials that appear to be used in magnets and other exotic uses. But they're the things in Australia for sure that are getting the sort of push ahead. Even lithium. Copper is a bit down the scale in terms of how really fundamentally critical people view it. But coming back to the tariff situation, that it's obviously factored into prices in the sense that there's an arbitrage situation there between prices locally in the US and elsewhere. But it's also been a factor in where stocks are held. And there's two aspects to that. One is obviously the purchasing of material. I think you described this before as just in case, Simon, and that seems to be a motivation in the copper world. But there's also an anticipatory factor here, which is keeping prices at at shade
Elevated
below $14,000 a ton. But this brings me back to the point that if you look at inventories overall, they're not particularly excessive, but they have risen quite substantially. And operating rates, certainly at the refinery level, have eased back. Now, in an old-fashioned world, that would say, well, prices have to recede, but they haven't.
Andy, I think it's interesting what Simon is saying, because it makes sense to me, and is also connected with what you are saying. The United States has built a 1 million ton stockpile, and basically for free. So
Yes.
Strategically, that's very, very important for the US. So I see no major reasons to change that policy. So the implicit threat that Simon is explaining makes sense from that perspective. I would like to add something else that I think is important to say. The potential exemptions that the U.S. Could negotiate with some countries. For example, Chile and Peru explain 75% of the imports of refined copper to the U.S. Chile and Peru are one of the few countries around the world without a trade deficit with the United States, countries with a free trade agreement. So some people around here is thinking that we could get a sort of exemption. So perhaps we could also add this possibility to the potential scenarios. So keeping on the air these potential tariffs, but at the same time keeping on the air the potential exemptions with some countries. So I think the situation is going to be much more complex, and it will be not as straightforward at the end.
Yeah.
Well,
Which
I
brings
think-
us back to the old demand side of the equation. And these prices, again, in the old-fashioned world, should surely make people think, well, what else can I use other than copper? How can I use less of it? And these are trends which have been going on since the metal was first used, I guess. Simon, you've mentioned this in the sense of data centers. These are a big growing source of copper uses, but at $14,000 a ton or a shade less, then end users are surely looking at trying to reduce their burden on copper demand. To some extent, maybe the metal has migrated back to its core uses and it gets harder and harder to do that. Is this a different situation to if we'd had this conversation 40 or 50 years ago, for example, where uses that were too expensive got frittered away very quickly? And today, has copper migrated to things which we just simply cannot substitute as quickly?
Well, I think that technology works both to the advantage of copper and negatively too.
Yes.
You see it in what is starting to happen in data centers. For instance, you're upping the kV voltage to 800. That, so the experts tell me, is a negative for copper. You are seeing fiber optics being used increasingly in the racks themselves instead of copper. And NVIDIA, for instance, reports that by 2028, they will be using no copper. Instead, they will be going the light route, i.e. photonics. And they've just bought 2 photonic companies who are specialists in this area. There is talk about the redesign of transformers, etc., etc. And in traditional usages, in China, for instance, there's a big shift out of low voltage cables from copper into aluminium. And about 8 years ago, the largest aircon company, Daikin in Japan, announced that they were shifting 100% to aluminium copper tubing. Now China is following suit.
Yes.
So, you've got the pluses and the minuses.
But have we got used to these prices? I mean, obviously, it's a bit like our electricity bills or our household bills. We suffer, but what are you going to do? Sit there in front of candles or just keep paying the bill?
Until the moment comes when we say we can't afford it.
Yes. Well, I suspect
which leads into the big macro story, but let's leave that for another day.
I suspect we're sort of some way away from that. Look, gentlemen, we're running out of time a little bit. I do have a few comments to make on the way of the world at the moment, and that is there's one of the most glorious and magnificent sporting festivals going on at the moment called the Football World Cup. To you Americans and Australians and others out there, you call it a Soccer World Cup, but To us English, it's the Football World Cup. It happens every 4 years. I've been watching some of the games. They're on at awkward times. I did actually watch England play Croatia a couple of days ago, and I was very nervous as an Englishman. But England did okay, and in the forecasting sense, then England is very predictable. We'll almost make it to the final stages and then not quite get there. Much harder is forecasting the way of the future of copper, even in the very near term. But I'll leave you with a quote from a famous English or Scottish football manager of many years ago, who managed a very good English team called Liverpool. Someone asked him about how important is football, and he said, "Some people think it's a matter of life and death. I can assure them it's much more important than that." And I leave you on that note because copper feels a little bit like that at the moment. It is a metal which is important to life and death and the future of the world. Quick heads up on where will we be the next time we speak, a month down the road, and what would be your prediction for the rest of this calendar year? That's probably as far as we could possibly dare to tread, isn't it? Juan Carlos.
Well, last time I said that I expected the price at a relatively same level, and I think it was. But for the rest of the year, I still believe that the supply story is disappointing and will continue doing so. That for me is very important to set a sort of floor in the price. So even with some negative news from the demand side, I think there will be a floor not so far from where we are now.
Yes.
It is also interesting to note that the Chinese economic data is showing that the export are continue very strong. So that's certainly a sign that the economy is still resilient. So my last view here is all this conflict in around Iran, also Ukraine, shows that the geopolitical factor is not over, and actually is the contrary, in my opinion.
Yes.
We are having the perfect, let's say, by the book. We have the two sides of this trap happening, and therefore more instability around the world should be expected. So that's certainly something that will drag the economy and will probably put a ceiling to the price. I think my expectation for the copper price in the next in the rest of the year will be something similar to what we are, perhaps slightly below the current levels.
Yes. Well, no, Simon, you have a somewhat different view.
Well, I think the what we've not yet seen has been the impact on physical demand of the oil shock from the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the lagged
Because
effect.
the oil buffers, the stockpiles have been run down, and to get even under the best of conditions, that is, if tomorrow the Straits of Hormuz was reopened, it's going to take you 3 to 6 months before insurance companies will grant and the reinsurers will grant insurance for vessels to flow through the straits. It's going to take, according to what the Pentagon said to Congress at the end of April, it's going to take 6 months of mine clearing before the straits can be open for all traffic. At the moment, it's only open through the Iranian channels, which has a very limited capacity. So by the end of the year, I fear that the oil price and the shortages of oil and the products will work their way through the physical copper demand channels. It's a long channel from end user to the fabricator. So and add to that, the new chairman of the Fed is probably going to pursue a completely different monetary policy. He's not going to have the Fed put there all the time when there's a crisis. He's going to allow the crisis to work its way through the system. And thus, I think by the end of the year, you are going to see America in recession and most of the world in recession throughout most of next year. And because of that, the trend for copper prices, despite the disruptions to supplies that Juan Carlos has expressed so well, we will, by the fourth quarter of this year, we will be seeing the demand destruction. And therefore, I think we will see lower copper prices. How much lower, I'm not prepared to say publicly.
Okay, well, that's a wrap for episode 11. We hope you've enjoyed the insights that we provided, and we are the World Copper Podcast. If you want to learn more about us, look us up on the website www.theworldcopper.com. We speak about the copper market in depth each month. Please join us again. In the meantime, safe travels, and we'll see you again.